Cold was the only thing the Black Moon Pack had ever given Alara for free. It was a bone-deep chill that seeped through the thin, patched blanket she huddled under and radiated from the damp stone floor of her shack. It lived in the gnawing emptiness of her stomach and in the hollow space in her chest where a wolf's spirit was supposed to be. She was wolfless, an omega, the lowest of the low, a broken thing. The morning light, thin and gray, sliced through a crack in the wooden wall, signaling the start of another day of servitude. Alara pushed herself up, her muscles screaming in protest. Bruises, old and new, painted her skin in shades of purple and yellow, a miserable tapestry woven by the pack's cruelty. Her back ached from scrubbing the great hall's floors until midnight, her reward a stale crust of bread she had eaten while shivering in the dark. She pulled on her threadbare tunic, the coarse fabric scratching against her skin. There was no mirror in her small, desolate room, but she knew what she would see. A pale, too thin girl with haunted gray eyes and dirt-smudged cheeks. Invisible. Unwanted. A sharp, commanding howl echoed from the pack house, Alpha Marcus's call for the morning's duties. It grated on her nerves, a sound she associated with pain and humiliation. She had to hurry. Being late meant punishment, and she already bore too many marks of their displeasure. As she tied a worn leather cord around her waist, her fingers brushed against the hidden shape beneath her tunic, on her right hip. A secret, a danger. A small silvery mark in the shape of a perfect crescent moon. Her mother, with her last dying breath, had made her promise. "Never show it, Ilara," she had whispered, her eyes wide with a fear Ilara hadn't understood. "They will not understand. They will destroy you for it. Hide it. Always." Ilara had obeyed. For 10 years since her mother's passing, she had kept the mark hidden, a constant, tingling reminder of a past she couldn't remember, and a secret she didn't comprehend. It was just one more thing that made her different, one more reason to stay in the shadows. She slipped out of her shack and into the cold morning air. The packlands were already stirring with life. Warriors trained in the yard, their grunts and the clash of practice blades filling the air. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the muddy path, making herself as small as possible. To be seen was to be targeted. "Look, the stray is finally out of its kennel," a mocking voice sneered. Ilara's shoulders hunched instinctively. Seraphina, the beta's daughter, stood with her 2 acolytes, Lyra and Faye. They were beautiful, strong and cruel, their wolves preening just beneath their skin. Seraphina's eyes, a cold, hard blue, raked over Ilara with contempt. "Did you enjoy your beauty sleep, Omega?" Seraphina purred, stepping directly into Ilara's path. "You look even more pathetic than usual today." I have to get to the kitchens," Ilara mumbled, her gaze locked on the ground. "Not so fast." Lyra shoved her shoulder, sending Ilara stumbling back. "Seraphina asked you a question." "It doesn't matter what she asked." Another voice boomed, dripping with authority and disdain. Alpha Marcus emerged from the pack house, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He was a brute of an alpha, ruling with fear and brute force. His eyes, small and piggy, settled on Ilara with a familiar look of disgust. "This thing doesn't have the right to speak unless spoken to by me. Now get to the kitchens and scrub the cauldrons. They're filthy from last night's feast." He looked at her worn tunic. "And for the goddess's sake, find something less repulsive to wear. You're an eyesore." Seraphina and her friends snickered. Humiliation burned hot in Ilara's chest, a stark contrast to the ever-present cold. She nodded mutely, scurrying past them toward the kitchens, their laughter following her like a physical blow. Inside the steamy heat of the kitchen, she was handed a bucket and a stiff brush, The head cook, a stout she-wolf named Martha, offered a sliver of sympathy in her eyes but said nothing. No one dared to openly defy the alpha or his favorites. Kindness was a liability. Hours passed in a blur of back-breaking labor. Ilara scrubbed, polished, and hauled, her body moving on autopilot while her mind retreated to the one safe place it had. The faint, hazy memories of her mother's smile and the soft lullabies she used to sing. It was late afternoon when the summons came, a frantic pack-wide call from the Alpha, an order for every single member to assemble in the main square. Immediately. The urgency in the call was unusual, laced with a threat of something Ilara had never heard in Alpha Marcus's voice before. Fear. She filed out with the other kitchen staff, her heart beginning to pound with a nervous rhythm. Crowds meant exposure. Exposure meant pain. Alpha Marcus stood on the steps of the Great Hall, his face pale. His beta stood beside him, looking just as shaken. "A rider has just arrived from the capital," Marcus announced, his voice tight. "The Alpha King, Kale, is making his great inspection. He will be here by moonrise." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the assembled pack. The Alpha King. King Kale was a legend, a myth, the alpha of alphas. He hadn't left his royal citadel in over a decade. He was said to be a ruthless warrior who had single-handedly ended the Southern Rebellion, his power apocalyptic. They said his wolf was a demon, a shadow beast born of rage and darkness. "His royal decree is absolute," Marcus continued, swallowing hard. "Every pack member is to be present and accounted for. And every unmated she-wolf, of age, is to present herself to him upon his arrival." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Ilara's carefully constructed numbness. Every unmated she-wolf. That meant her. There was no hiding, no escape. She would be forced to stand before this terrifying king, exposed and vulnerable. Serafina, standing near the front, shot a triumphant, venomous look over her shoulder directly at Ilara. Her expression was clear. This was another opportunity for humiliation, a grander stage than ever before. To be presented as the pack's wolfless omega before a king. The shame would be unbearable. But beneath the terror, a different kind of fear stirred. A deeper, older dread that connected to the tingling mark on her hip. Her mother's warning echoed in her mind. "They will destroy you." She had to stand before the most powerful werewolf on the continent, a man whose senses were said to be so sharp he could smell a lie from a mile away. How could she possibly hide her secret from a king? The hours leading up to moonrise were a frantic, chaotic blur. The pack house was scrubbed and decorated with a desperate haste. Warriors polished their armor, and the unmated she-wolves preened and prepared, each one dreaming of being the one chosen by the legendary king. He was famously mateless, his search for his other half a story whispered in every pack. Ilara was given the task of cleaning the privies, a final pointed insult from Serafina, who was now overseeing the preparations. The stench clung to her, a fitting perfume for the pack's refuse. When she was finally dismissed, there was no time to do more than splash frigid water on her face and hands. She wore the same ragged tunic, her hair a tangled mess. She was a smudge of dirt in a gallery of polished gems. As the moon climbed into the sky, its silver light washing over the tense pack, a palpable wave of power rolled over the lands. It was a physical force, an oppressive weight that made the air thick and hard to breathe. It demanded submission, pressing down on every wolf, forcing their inner beasts to whine and cower. Ilara felt it crush her, stealing the air from her lungs. This was not the power of an alpha. This was the power of a god. A procession of massive warriors clad in black and silver armor marched into the square. They moved with a lethal silence that was more terrifying than any war cry. And at their center, walking with a predatory grace that defied his size, was the Alpha King. King Kale was not a man. He was a force of nature. He stood well over 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the moonlight. His face was all harsh lines and brutal beauty, as if carved from granite by a merciless sculptor. A black cloak billowed around him, and his presence was a vortex of ancient power and chilling cold. But it was his eyes that held the world captive. They were not black or brown or blue. They were the color of molten gold, glowing with an inner fire that spoke of immense, barely contained power and a profound, soul-deep loneliness. Alpha Marcus, trembling visibly, bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the ground. Alpha King Kale, my king, the Black Moon Pack welcomes you. Kale's golden eyes swept over Marcus with utter disinterest, dismissing him as one might an insect. His gaze scanned the silent, terrified pack, searching. There was a manic energy coming from him, a feral desperation that was terrifying to behold. His beta, a grim-faced wolf named Rorik, stood at his side, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The unmated. Kale's voice was a low growl, a rumble that vibrated deep in Alara's bones. It was not a request. Marcus scrambled to obey. At once, my king! Line them up! The she-wolves were herded into a long, trembling line. Seraphina pushed her way to the front, her head held high, a confident, predatory smile on her lips. She had changed into a silken gown that shimmered in the moonlight, her hair styled in intricate braids. She was the perfect picture of an alpha's daughter. Alara was shoved to the very end of the line, hidden behind the others. She kept her head bowed, her filthy tunic a shroud of shame. She prayed to a goddess she wasn't sure she believed in to remain invisible. Just a few more minutes, and he would pass her by. He would choose Seraphina or some other beautiful, worthy she-wolf, and this would all be over. The king began to walk down the line. The air crackled around him. He didn't look at their faces. His golden eyes were half closed, and he seemed to be breathing in the air around each wolf, tasting it, judging it. One by one, he passed them. A faint, almost imperceptible shake of his head was the only sign of his rejection. Hope died in the eyes of each she-wolf he left behind. He passed Seraphina. She offered him a dazzling smile and a graceful curtsy. He didn't even slow down. His disinterest was so absolute it was a physical insult. A flash of furious disbelief crossed Seraphina's face before she masked it. He was getting closer. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could smell him now. His scent was intoxicating, a wild, clean fragrance of pine, ancient stone, and a thunderstorm breaking over a winter forest. It called to something deep inside her, something she didn't know she possessed. He was in front of the wolf next to her. He paused. He breathed in. He shook his head. Then he was in front of her. Time stopped. The oppressive weight of his power intensified 1,000-fold, focusing solely on her. He went utterly still. His head, which had been angled down, snapped up. His golden eyes flew open, blazing with an apocalyptic fire. They locked onto her. And the world shattered. A scent hit him, a scent he had been hunting for across a century of lonely, bitter existence. It wasn't the cloying perfume of the other females. It was the scent of moonlight on fresh snow, of wild herbs crushed underfoot, of a forgotten magic that his soul recognized with a primal, soul-shaking certainty. Mate. The word was not a thought. It was a roar from the ancient beast chained within him, a feral cry of victory and possession. For Ilara, the world dissolved into a dizzying vortex of sensation. A lightning bolt of pure energy shot through her, igniting every nerve ending. It was a connection, a bond, snapping into place with the force of a tidal wave. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming, and beneath the terror, it felt like coming home, a home she'd never known. The king took a step closer, his entire being focused on her with an intensity that burned. The crowd, the pack, the world, it all faded into nothing. There was only him. He raised a hand, his movement slow, as if not to startle a wild creature. His knuckles brushed her cheek, and another jolt of raw power surged between them. His touch wasn't harsh. It was reverent. Mine, he growled. The word was a vow, a command, a declaration to the universe. It resonated not in her ears, but in her very soul, a brand of ownership she felt settled deep in her bones. Ilara's head swam. Fear warred with an inexplicable magnetic pull that urged her to lean into his touch, to seek shelter in his overwhelming power. She was terrified, confused, and trembling from head to toe. But the moment was shattered by a screech of pure, undiluted rage. "No!" Serafina shrieked, her carefully crafted composure utterly gone. She stormed forward, her face twisted into a mask of ugly fury. "My king, you can't! You don't understand what she is!" Alpha Marcus, his face ashen with shock and horror, rushed to Serafina's side. "She is right, my king. There has been a mistake. This thing is a wolfless omega. She is filth, a disgrace to our pack." King Kale did not take his eyes off Ilara. His golden gaze softened with a fierce, protective light. A low, lethal growl rumbled in his chest, a promise of death to anyone who dared to interfere. The temperature in the square dropped by 20 degrees. "She is worthless," Serafina spat, pointing a trembling finger at Ilara. "She scrubs our floors. She is nothing. No one would ever choose her." The mockery from that morning was now a desperate, frantic plea. The king finally turned his head, his molten gold eyes pinning Serafina and Marcus with a look of such apocalyptic fury that they both flinched back, as if physically struck. "You dare," he hissed, each word a shard of ice. "You dare speak of my queen in such a manner." My queen. The words hung in the stunned silence. Ilara's mind couldn't process it. Queen? Her? The wolfless, broken Omega? It was impossible. A dream. A nightmare. But before Kale could unleash the violence simmering just beneath his skin, Marcus made a fatal error. Humiliated before his pack, terrified of the king's wrath, and incensed that this legendary warrior would choose the pack's punching bag over his own prized she-wolves, he snapped. His pride overrode his fear. "This cannot stand!" Marcus roared, his face purpling with rage. "I will not allow our pack to be shamed. I will not allow you to be tainted by this filth. I will deal with her myself. I will put this sick animal down." With a guttural snarl, he tore his clothes as he shifted. Bones cracked and reformed, muscle expanding as he transformed into his wolf, a large, mangy brown beast with hate-filled eyes. He was big, but his form was clumsy, fueled by rage rather than true power. He ignored the king completely. He ignored the gasps of the crowd. His entire being was focused on one goal: to rip out the throat of the girl who had caused his ultimate humiliation. Kale's beta, Rorik, moved to intervene, drawing his blade. "My king!" "Wait," Kale commanded, his voice lethally calm. He did not move to protect her, a strange confidence in his golden eyes. It was a test, a crucible. Marcus's wolf lunged, the world slowed to a crawl for Ilara. She saw the massive paws digging into the dirt, the powerful muscles bunching for the final leap. She saw the slobber flying from his bared teeth, the promise of a swift, brutal end in his eyes. Her life didn't flash before her eyes. There was only terror. Pure, absolute terror. And then, something inside her broke. Not her spirit. Not her bones. A cage. A cage that had been locked for 20 years, deep within her soul, finally shattered. As Marcus's jaws, inches from her throat, prepared to snap shut, the crescent moon mark on her hip erupted with a blinding silver light. It wasn't just a glow, it was a silent explosion of pure, celestial energy. The light tore through her ragged tunic, burning it to ash, and engulfed her in a column of ethereal power. A scream was torn from her throat, but it was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of transformation, of agony and ecstasy, of a power too vast to be contained in a human form. The silver light pulsed, forcing the entire pack, even the king's royal guard, to shield their eyes. Alpha Marcus's wolf was thrown back, not by a physical blow, but by the sheer force of the energy wave, as if he'd run headfirst into a mountain. He yelped, tumbling through the air and landing in a heap, whimpering and stunned. Inside the pillar of light, Alara's body was being ripped apart and remade. Bones snapped and elongated, her form twisting and expanding at an impossible rate. But this was no normal shift. Where fur should have grown, a coat of pure, shimmering white, like spun moonlight, appeared. Her frame grew larger and larger still, eclipsing Marcus's wolf, surpassing even the legends of the largest dire wolves. When the light finally receded, Ilara was gone. In her place stood a creature of myth, a wolf, but a wolf like none had ever seen. She was colossal, her shoulders level with the king's head. Her fur was not simply white. It glowed with a soft internal luminescence, as if she were woven from the fabric of the moon itself. Her eyes were not gray or gold or blue. They were twin pools of liquid silver, ancient and wise and filled with an apocalyptic power that dwarfed everything around her. A faint glowing crescent moon, identical to the mark on her human hip, shimmered on her forehead. This was no mere wolf. This was the lunar wolf, the first wolf, the wolf of the goddess. Absolute terrified silence fell over the square. The oppressive weight of the king's power was gone, replaced by something far older, far more profound. It was the raw, untamed magic of the world, and it was radiating from her. Every wolf, from the lowest Omega to the king's elite guard, felt their inner beasts not just submit, but bow in primal, instinctual worship. They were in the presence of their creator. Seraphina had fallen to her knees, her face a mask of chalk-white terror, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream. Alpha Marcus, shifted back to his human form, naked and bleeding, stared with wide, insane eyes, babbling incoherently. King Kale had not moved. His golden eyes were wide, the feral hunger replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. The loneliness that had haunted him for a century was gone, burned away by the silver light of her presence. He saw not just his mate, he saw his destiny. He saw the salvation of their people. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, then another. He walked past the cowering form of Alpha Marcus, his gaze never leaving the magnificent lunar wolf. He stopped a few feet before her, the sheer scale of her awe inspiring. His beta, Rorik, tensed. "My king, be careful." Kyle ignored him. He looked into those liquid silver eyes, and he saw Alara there, confused and frightened, but radiating a power she was only just beginning to comprehend. And then, the Alpha King, the Alpha of Alphas, the most feared and powerful werewolf on the continent, did something no one had ever seen him do. He knelt. He dropped to one knee in the dirt, bowing his proud head before the creature of light that was his mate. He submitted, utterly, completely. His voice, when he spoke, was not a growl of possession, but a tone of pure, soul-deep reverence, loud enough for every single member of the pack to hear. "My queen." The magnificent wolf tilted her head, a flicker of confusion in her silver eyes. A soft, questioning whine escaped her, a sound that was both ethereal and heartbreakingly vulnerable. Then, the sheer exhaustion of the transformation, of unleashing a power she'd contained for 2 decades, overwhelmed her. Her massive form wavered, the silver light around her flickering. With a sigh that sounded like the wind through ancient trees, she collapsed, her form shrinking, the white fur receding, the silver light dimming until it was just Alara again, curled naked and unconscious on the cold, hard ground. The glowing crescent mark on her hip was now a soft, pearlescent silver, a permanent testament to what she was. Before anyone else could even think to move, Kale was there. He surged to his feet, crossing the distance in a single fluid motion. He shrugged off his heavy black cloak and wrapped it gently around her small, fragile form, hiding her from the prying, terrified eyes of the pack. He gathered her into his arms as if she were made of the most delicate glass. He held her against his chest, her head lolling against his shoulder. His protective fury returned, 1,000 times stronger than before. His molten gold eyes swept across the stunned faces of the Black Moon pack, a silent promise of retribution in their depths. He looked at Seraphina, who was still on her knees, trembling uncontrollably. He looked at the blubbering, broken form of Alpha Marcus. His gaze was a death sentence. "Rorik," he commanded, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "My king," the beta responded instantly, his sword already in hand. "Secure the Alpha and the beta's daughter. Place them in the dungeons. No one speaks to them. No one touches them. They will answer to the queen when she awakens." He turned his gaze to the rest of the pack, who flinched under his wrath. "This pack is now under my direct command. Anyone who disputes this will die." There was no argument. Not a single wolf dared to meet his eye. Without another word, King Kale turned and walked away from the chaos, carrying Alara as if she weighed nothing. He strode toward the great hall, his royal guard falling into formation around him, a moving fortress of black and silver. He didn't take her to a guest room. He took her directly to the Alpha's suite, the one that had been hastily prepared for him, kicking the door open and then shutting it firmly behind him, plunging them into a world of silence and safety. He laid her gently on the massive bed, its soft furs and silks a stark contrast to the miserable pallet she had known her entire life. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking down at her. His mate, his queen, a lunar wolf. The legends were true. A maelstrom of emotions warred within him. Overwhelming relief, bone-deep adoration, and an apocalyptic rage at what had been done to her. He could feel the faint traces of her pain, the echoes of years of abuse, through their new fragile bond. It was a poison that he vowed to purge from the world. He gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. Her skin was cold. He pulled the furs up around her, tucking her in. He then went to the hearth, his movements efficient and precise, and built a roaring fire, chasing the chill from the room. Alara stirred hours later, a soft groan escaping her lips. Her body ached with a strange, thrumming energy, but it wasn't the familiar pain of bruises and overwork. It was the ache of newly forged power settling into her bones. She opened her eyes. She wasn't in her shack. She was in a vast, opulent room, lying in a bed so soft she felt like she was floating. A warm fire crackled in a huge stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the timbered walls. Panic seized her. Where was she? What happened? The memories came rushing back in a chaotic flood. The king's arrival, his golden eyes, the word, mine, Seraphina's rage, Marcus's attack, the blinding silver light. The shift. She scrambled up, pulling the heavy furs around her naked body. The king's cloak had fallen away. She was in the Alpha's suite. She was alone. No, not alone. From the shadows in the corner of the room, a figure emerged. King Kale. He had been sitting in a chair, watching over her. He moved into the firelight, and her breath caught in her throat. He was even more intimidating in the confines of a room. "You are awake," he said, his voice softer now, the harsh edges smoothed away. She flinched, pulling the furs tighter. What? What happened? What am I? The question was a terrified whisper. He walked closer, stopping a respectful distance from the bed. "You are exactly what you were born to be," he said, his golden eyes full of a reverence that she couldn't comprehend. "You are a lunar wolf, a child of the moon goddess, the true royalty of our kind." Alara stared at him, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. I'm wolfless. I'm an omega." A flicker of pain crossed his face. "You were never wolfless. Your power was simply dormant, bound. A blessing of that magnitude would have destroyed a child's body. It waited until you were ready, until your mate was here to anchor you." He paused, his gaze intense. "Until I was here." He explained the ancient lore, stories she'd never heard, tales suppressed by generations of power-hungry alphas. The lunar wolves were the first wolves, their bloodline a direct gift from the goddess. They ruled not with fear, but with a balance of grace and power, their very presence nurturing the land and the people. The silver crescent was their sigil, the mark of the true queen. "Centuries ago," he continued, his voice low, "the line was thought to be broken. A jealous faction of alphas conspired to hunt them down, fearing a power they could not control. They believed they had succeeded. They plunged our world into an age of imbalance, an age of petty tyrants like Marcus." He looked at her, his expression raw. "My own bloodline has carried a prophecy for 500 years, that a king would arise whose power was a shadow, and he would find his mate in the light. That together, they would restore the balance. I have searched for you my entire life, Alara." Her name on his lips was a caress. It was all too much. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't be. I'm no one. I'm broken." "No," he said, his voice firm, stepping closer until he was right beside the bed. He knelt, so his golden eyes were level with hers. "They tried to break you. They took a diamond and tried to convince it that it was dust. But they failed." He reached out, his hand hovering over the silver mark on her hip, which was faintly visible through the furs. "This is not a brand of shame. It is your crown." A tear slid down her cheek. He reached up and gently wiped it away with his thumb, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. The bond between them hummed, no longer terrifying, but a comforting, steady presence. It was a cord of strength, pulling her out of the darkness she had lived in for so long. "Rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow, you will show them all what a queen is." The next day, the entire Black Moon pack was once again assembled in the square. This time, the atmosphere was not one of mockery or tension, but of pure, unadulterated fear. At the top of the Great Hall steps, 2 thrones had been placed. One was large, carved of dark oak, the king's throne. The other was more slender, made of a pale, silvery wood that seemed to glow. It was empty. King Kale stood beside it, his face a mask of cold justice. His royal guards lined the steps, a wall of silent, deadly force. Then, the doors to the great hall opened. Alara emerged. She was no longer the ragged Omega. She wore a simple but elegant gown of deep blue that shimmered like the night sky. Her hair had been brushed until it shone, falling in soft waves down her back. She wore no jewelry, no crown, but she needed none. Her power was her diadem. As she walked, her steps silent and sure, a faint, silvery aura shimmered around her. Her gray eyes, no longer haunted, were clear and steady. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was not the girl they had tormented. This was a goddess. She walked to the empty throne and stood before it. Kyle turned to her, and the coldness in his expression melted away, replaced by adoration. He took her hand, his large, calloused one enveloping hers. "The throne of the Lunar Queen awaits," he said, his voice carrying across the silent square. Alara took a deep breath, drawing strength from his touch and from the humming power within her. She turned and sat upon the throne. It felt right, as if she had been born for it. "Bring the prisoners," Kale commanded. Alpha Marcus and Seraphina were dragged forward by two of the king's guards. They were disheveled and filthy from a night in the dungeons. They were forced to their knees at the bottom of the steps, forced to look up at the girl they had spent years abusing, now sitting on a throne above them. Seraphina was sobbing, her pride shattered. Marcus was a wreck, his eyes wild with terror and disbelief. "Alpha Marcus of the Black Moon Pack," Kale's voice boomed, devoid of any warmth. "You are charged with the systematic abuse of a pack member, the dereliction of your duties as an alpha, and a direct assault on the queen of all werewolves. Your crimes are witnessed by all." He then turned his gaze to Seraphina. "Seraphina, daughter of the Beta, you are charged with conspiracy and complicity in these same crimes. Your cruelty is a stain upon this pack." He looked down at Alara, his expression softening. "The verdict is not mine to give." He presented her to the crowd. "Justice belongs to your queen." All eyes turned to Alara. This was her moment. The moment to choose between the mercy she had never been shown and the vengeance she so richly deserved. She looked down at the two pathetic figures kneeling before her. She saw their fear, their desperation, and she felt nothing. The pain they had caused was a part of a life that was no longer hers. She stood, her voice clear and steady, imbued with a quiet authority that rang with the power of the moon itself. "Alpha Marcus," she began, her gaze pinning him to the spot. "You used your strength to torment the weak. You fostered a culture of cruelty and called it order. You have forgotten the sacred duty of an alpha, which is to protect all members of your pack, not just the ones you deem worthy." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You will not be executed. Death is too quick a mercy. You will be stripped of your rank and your wolf. You will spend the rest of your days in the deepest cell of the royal dungeons, alone with the knowledge of what you have lost. You will rot." Marcus let out a strangled cry. To lose one's wolf was a fate worse than death. Alara then turned her gaze to Seraphina, who was looking up at her with pleading, tear-filled eyes. "Seraphina," Alara said, her voice devoid of heat. "You delighted in the suffering of others. You took pleasure in my pain. You wished for me to be a rogue, cast out and alone. So, that is what you shall be." Seraphina's face went white. "You are hereby stripped of your name and your pack status. You are exiled from these lands and from all pack territories under the king's rule. You will live out your days as a rogue, to survive or perish on your own merits. You wanted me to have nothing. Now, it is you who has nothing." "No, please," Seraphina wailed, but the royal guards were already hauling her and Marcus away, their pleas echoing across the square before being silenced. Justice was done. A new era had begun. Alara looked out at the sea of faces, fearful, awestruck, and hopeful. She was their queen. The thought no longer terrified her. It empowered her. Kale came to her side, taking her hand. "It is done," he said softly, for her ears only. "It is just the beginning," she replied, and for the first time in her life, she looked toward the future not with dread, but with hope. That night, the royal suite felt different. It was no longer just a safe haven. It was their space, the heart of their new life. Alara stood by the large window, looking out at the moon, which seemed brighter and closer than ever before. She could feel its energy pouring into her, a comforting, familiar hum. Kale came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. She leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart against her back. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "I am," she said, and she was surprised to find it was true. I thought seeing them would make me feel hatred or satisfaction, but I just felt pity." "That is because your heart is worthy of a queen," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You showed them justice, not vengeance." A comfortable silence settled between them, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the whisper of the wind outside. The bond that connected them was a living thing, a current of warmth and light, an unwavering devotion flowing between them. Suddenly, the peaceful atmosphere shattered. The door to their suite burst open, flying off its hinges with a splintering crash. 3 figures clad in black leather, their faces obscured by shadows, stormed into the room. They moved with the silent, deadly grace of assassins. The man in the lead was older, his face a cruel sneer of ambition. He held a blade that shimmered with the unmistakable, deadly gleam of pure silver. Lord Valerius, a senior member of the king's own council. Kale reacted instantly. He shoved Alara behind him, his body becoming a human shield as he let out a feral snarl that shook the very foundations of the room. His golden eyes blazed, his power exploding outwards in a suffocating wave of pure rage. "Valerius!" Kale roared. "You dare! The throne is not yours to share with some legendary freak, Kyle." Valerius spat, his voice dripping with venom. "I helped your father secure his crown by purging the last of the lunar filth. I will not stand by and watch you undo my life's work. The power belongs to the Alphas, not to the ghosts of the past." The 2 assassins, both armed with silver daggers, broke away, their target clear. Alara. Kyle was forced into an impossible choice: defend himself from Valerius's silver blade or protect his mate from the other 2 attackers. He lunged toward Valerius, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. "Rorik!" he bellowed, a desperate call for his guard. But the assassins were fast. They were on her before the sound of his voice had faded. The Alara of 2 days ago would have cowered. She would have screamed. She would have died. But she was not that Alara anymore. As the first assassin raised his dagger, a primal instinct, cold and sharp as ice, surged through her. It was not a conscious thought. It was pure lunar power taking over. Her hands flew up, not to block, but to unleash. A pulse of pure, white-hot silver energy erupted from her palms. It wasn't a physical blow. It was an attack on the spirit. The 2 assassins screamed as the celestial power slammed into them, their inner wolves howling in agony. They staggered back, stunned and disoriented, their movements suddenly sluggish and clumsy. The silver daggers clattered to the floor. The briefest of moments was all Kale needed. Seeing his queen was safe, he unleashed the full, apocalyptic fury of his own power. He moved like a shadow of death, a blur of motion. He disarmed Valerius with a brutal twist of his arm, the snap of bone echoing in the room. He didn't hesitate. His hand, now clawed, lashed out, and the treacherous lord fell, his ambitions silenced forever. The royal guards, led by a frantic Rorik, finally burst into the room to find the fight already over. Kale stood over Valerius's body, his chest heaving, while the 2 assassins were on their knees, whimpering and clutching their heads, incapacitated by Alara's power. Kale's wild eyes immediately found Alara. She was standing by the window, her hands still glowing faintly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had not cowered. She had fought back. She had saved herself. The protective fury in his eyes softened into something deeper, something akin to worship. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him. "You're safe," he breathed into her hair. "You're safe." She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest, the scent of pine and winter storms chasing away the stench of death and betrayal. "We're safe," she corrected him, her voice muffled but strong. In that moment, standing amidst the wreckage of the attack, their bond solidified from a fragile cord into an unbreakable chain of steel and moonlight. They were not just king and queen, not just mates. They were partners, a shadow and a light, united against any darkness the world dared to throw at them. 6 months later, the wind was cool and sweet as it swept across the high balcony of the royal citadel. It carried the scent of blooming moon-petal flowers from the gardens below and the distant, happy sounds of a city at peace. Queen Alara stood at the stone balustrade, looking out over her kingdom. The lands, once scarred by the iron-fisted rule of squabbling alphas, were now thriving. The oppressive fear was gone, replaced by a deep-seated respect and reverence for the king and his lunar queen. Her presence, the legend said, had a healing effect on the land itself. Crops grew fuller, winters were less harsh, and the wolves felt more connected to the earth, to the moon, and to each other. She was no longer the haunted girl from the Black Moon Pack. She was a ruler. She wore a gown of silver silk that matched her eyes, and her hair was held back by a simple circlet of moonstone and silver. She moved with a confidence and grace that was entirely her own, her power a calm, steady sea within her, no longer a raging storm. She had learned to control it, to wield it not as a weapon, but as a tool for healing and protection. She had visited every pack, not as a conqueror, but as a leader, listening to their troubles and offering solutions. The people did not fear her. They loved her. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and a familiar, intoxicating scent washed over her. She smiled, leaning back into the solid warmth of Kale's chest. "What is my queen contemplating so seriously?" he murmured, his lips brushing against her ear. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice soft, "about a girl in a ragged tunic, scrubbing floors in a pack that hated her." Kale's arms tightened around her. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his golden eyes gazing out at the same vista. "I think about her, too," he admitted, his voice a low growl. "And I think about the monster who let her suffer for even a moment under his rule." "That monster is gone," she said, turning in his arms to face him. She placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. He was replaced by a king who kneels for his queen. A smile touched his harsh features, a rare and beautiful sight that was reserved only for her. He kneels because she is the only thing in this world worthy of his worship. He looked down at her, his love for her a tangible force in his golden eyes. The century of loneliness had been completely erased, replaced by a devotion so profound it was humbling. He was still the ruthless, powerful Alpha King to the rest of the world, but with her, he was simply Kale. And she, who had been a nameless Omega, was simply Alara. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was not frantic or desperate, but deep and full of a shared history and a promised future. It spoke of battles won, of fears conquered, and of a love that had literally remade their world. He gently touched the side of her hip through the silk of her gown, where he knew the silvery crescent mark lay. It was a symbol of her birthright, a mark of her power, but to him, it would always be the first piece of her he had ever known, the secret she had guarded that had led him to his salvation. They mocked you, he whispered against her lips, a trace of the old fury in his voice. They said no one would choose you. They were wrong, she whispered back, a radiant smile spreading across her face as she looked into the eyes of her king, her mate, her partner. The only one who mattered did. And as the full moon rose over the peaceful kingdom, the Alpha King and his lunar queen stood united, a shadow and a light, a promise kept. Their love the truest and most powerful magic of all. A diamond, once buried in the dirt, now shone as brightly as the moon itself, a beacon for all to see.